All right. So first of all, thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's great to be here. Robert, thank you for offering to have me come in and talk to you a little bit about very high level LGBTQ plus 101 stuff and a little bit about how LGBTQ plus chambers serve and what LGBTQ plus audiences look like, et cetera, things that might be helpful for your businesses and things that might be helpful for your personal life as well. I'm thrilled to be here. We're also thrilled to be a partner of Beacon in many different ways over the past couple of years. You know, there's been very few silver linings for groups like ours during a worldwide pandemic, especially when we're not able to get together in person. But one was certainly the partnership that we struck up with Beacon and the several events that we had online together and the ways that we're able to cross-pollinate our memberships and learn from one another. So at least on our end, we are very grateful for that. Thrilled to see some folks in the room who I've seen at other meetings before. And I'm gonna move on with this. So just a quick introduction to me. I'm Zach Wilcha. My pronouns are he, him, and his. As Robert said, I'm the first executive director of the IBA. We'll talk more about the Independence Business Alliance a little bit later. I am a recovering attorney and current nonprofit warrior, much to my parents' chagrin, but it's work that I love to do. And I used my law degree much more in the nonprofit space than I did as a desk jockey in a very large law firm in Philadelphia for quite a while. I'm a long-suffering Philadelphia sports fan. I put that in there for when I do presentations in other parts of the country. I assume that I have many compadres on this call who are also long-suffering Philadelphia sports fans. If it's important to you, I'm a Sagittarius with a Capricorn rising, which is why I'm a lot more fun than you think I come across as a pretty robotic Capricorn. I'm the oldest child of 3, and I'm an ENTJ if you're a Myers-Briggs person. Originally from the area where the office takes place, a little town called Peckville in Northeast Pennsylvania. If we have any Northeast Pennsylvanians here, it's always great to connect with other refugees from the region. And I'll give you all of my contact information at the end of this, of course, but anybody should feel free to contact me at zach@thinkiba.com. So some ground rules for our talk today. Let's be interactive. If you have questions, please ask them. It's small enough to be an intimate group, so interrupt me if you need to. This is a safe, judgment-free space for questions you might not want to ask elsewhere. You have a gay at your disposal who's here in a safe, judgmental-free way. If you have questions you've always wanted to ask but felt uncomfortable in other spaces, I want you to feel comfortable here to do so. If you do say something wrong or accidentally offensive, I will not infer any ill intent about what you're saying, but I will repeat what you said and gently correct you as a way to learn and not to chastise. This is going to be as comprehensive as possible for the short amount of time that we have, and it is a lot of information. You don't have to learn everything today. I'll do my best to answer, but I want to tell everybody that even as a person working in the LGBTQ plus space, I'm always learning too, so I may not know the answers that you have questions for. And today, I hope that you'll leave with some action steps that will help you be a better ally, if that's what one of your goals is. Okay, so very, very top level stuff. So we're going to break all of this down. Don't worry about absorbing it all at this moment, but gender does not equal sex. That's a very good starting point for where we are. Sex assigned at birth, commonly referred to as sex, is social, legal, medical designation assigned at birth based on medical assessment of the body. If you've had children and they hand the child over to you, they tell you what the sex is assigned at birth right away. It's usually male or female when they tell you right away at birth. And your gender is different because it's how your identity relates to society's idea of what it means to be a woman, a man, neither, both, or a mix of a couple genders. And we'll get into what that means as well. A very simple way to put it is gender is who you go to bed as, and sexual orientation, which we'll also get into, is with whom you go to bed. My parents are both educators, so I had to make sure that the whom was there instead of the who. Born with a red pen in my hand.
Hey,
yes.
Zach, another way it's been described to me is that, you know, sex is between your legs and gender is between your ears, just as another way to think about it.
Yeah, possibly. That's one good way to do it. We'll see that sex is sometimes even beyond what is between your legs as we get into this conversation a little bit more. But that's also a nice little mnemonic way that we can learn what that is. So wait, what? Sex assigned at birth, like I just said. So this is the decision which sex marker is placed on someone's birth certificate at the time of your birth. It does not mean that that is the sex that you relate to your entire life, but it generally is. Most people are aligned with the sex marker on their birth certificate at birth. Your sexual orientation, which we just talked about a little bit, is describing what genders a person may be attracted to, if any. And gender. So gender is a really complicated concept, meaning it's everything comprising culture, identity, social norms, and expression of sense of self. It happens to be that many folks are have their gender aligned with what their sex assigned at birth is. You'll find many boys that are assigned male at birth, playing with toys and trucks as they grow up, etc. And a lot of that has to do with expectations that society puts on folks, but in other ways, it's just the way things pan out. Gender identity is how a person experiences gender in their heart, body, mind, and soul. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated. Suppose your sex assigned at birth is male, but how you experience gender in your heart, mind, body, and or soul is female, then you might identify your gender as female, even though your sex assigned at birth was male. And your gender expression is the externality of that. It's a person's behavior, mannerisms, and appearance that are associated with a gender in a particular cultural, geographical, and or historical context. So a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today are specific to United States of America and to this region specifically. It could mean very different things in countries where they have a different understanding of what gender expressions are. You'll hear often sometimes that places like India, for example, have a third gender that is somewhere between male and female that is more feminine, that they respect as a third gender there. So we'll be discussing and unpacking some of that as well. So this was kind of complicated right away. And again, you don't have to learn everything. There's not going to be a test, it's memorizing. These are just some baseline concepts that we're going to have as we get into our conversation of how to be better allies. Does anybody have any questions on these? Because I know that this is it's a tough 101 lesson. Robert, I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I'm curious if there's, and I almost feel badly, I haven't researched this, but is there an age or whatever that people commonly identify their gender? You know, I know a number of people that it's very early on, like 7, 8 years old, things like that. I'm curious about that.
So I don't think that there's a particular age, but I do think as these concepts are more introduced into mainstream conversations, it tips people off a little bit earlier that this is an experience that they might be having. I think, in years past, people might have been afraid to admit that their sex assigned at birth might not be matching what they wanted their gender identity or gender expression to be. So I think we're seeing younger and younger folks identifying this as an experience that they're having, but I don't think that there's any particular age that this happens. And we'll talk about sexual orientation as well. We see people, at least in our experience as an LGBTQ plus chamber, coming out at all different ages. We have people that, knew from very early on at birth that they were like, in my experience, I knew that I loved the Dukes of Hazzard in ways that I could not explain. So I knew something was up way early. And we have folks that, somebody just came to one of our last meetings who just got divorced and is coming out at 50 years old. So it's really all over the map. Any other questions before we move on to some other concepts? And note that I can only see 5 of you at a time. So if you do have questions, just shout them out. So let's talk about the LGBTQIA plus under the queer umbrella. In our chamber, we just refer to it as LGBTQ plus. The plus does a lot of heavy lifting for us. But for this conversation, I wanted to make sure we talked about the Q and the I and the A a little bit as well, just so you have some definitions to work with. People do often complain that this LGBTQIA plus is always growing and they cannot learn what these letters are. But I always tell people that if you know the roster, the starting lineup of the Phillies, or you are watching The Bachelor or Bachelorette on TV and can name 9 or more of those bachelors, then you are in great shape to be able to learn what these letters are in an order that makes sense to other people. So we have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, asexual or aromantic, and more. And we're going to break those down now. So lesbian, who is a woman who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to other women. Women or non-binary people may use this term to describe themselves. And put a pin in non-binary, we will get to that as well. But we're only talking about sexual orientation right now. Gay is a person who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to members of the same gender. Men, women, or non-binary people may use this term to describe themselves, and it's often used to describe men or as a catch-all for the entire community. So you'll hear the gay community, and that's basically including everybody in the LGBTQ plus community, or sometimes you'll just hear it to describe a group of men. Bisexual is a person emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to more than one sex, gender, or gender identity, though not necessarily simultaneously in the same way or to the same degree. So there's a spectrum that people can be on, is what we're talking about here, where you might be bisexual and attracted to several different genders, and it might not be all at the same time. It might be concurrently. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50. There are no rules to get into the bisexual club. You just, there are no quotas. There are no numbers that you have to report at the door. You just need to be emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to more than one sex, gender, or gender identity. We're going to do a whole slide on transgender. So again, put a pin in that. Queer. This is a controversial one. So it's a term that people often use to express a spectrum of identities and orientations that are counter to the mainstream. It's often used as a catch-all to include many people, including those who do not identify as exclusively straight and or folks that have non-binary or gender expansive identities. This term was previously used as a slur, but has been reclaimed by many parts of the LGBTQ plus movement. So my recommendation for straight people is to not use queer because it used to be a slur, and it's been reclaimed by the LGBTQ plus community as something that we use for ourselves. And there are even people within the LGBTQ plus community that do not like this term at all. So it's something that's been reclaimed. Our peers in Nashville, Tennessee, they have an LGBTQ plus chamber there, and they wanted to know whether they should add the Q to their name like we did in Philadelphia. And they took a poll survey of their members, and 76% of them said that they found queer offensive and did not want it to be used. So in the Philadelphia area, I think it's pretty regionally okay to use this as a catch-all for the entire community. But for folks that have undergone previous traumas associated with queer being used as a slur, it might not be okay. So it's a complicated and controversial term that you'll sometimes hear. That's maybe not one that is for you if you are straight. Questioning is pretty easy. It's a term used to describe people who are in the process of exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity. So intersex is an umbrella term for people who have variations of combinations of sex characteristics that fall outside expected male and female combinations. Now, this is a term that used to be called hermaphrodite, but that over the years has become a slur itself, and now it is known as intersex. And it is a phenomenon that is more common than people think. Many people are born with different kinds of combinations of sex characteristics, often internally, that they don't even know that they might be intersex or not. But there's a very large intersex community, and it's a growing movement as well. So asexual or aromantic is exactly what you're thinking. It's often called ACE for short, and it refers to a complete or partial lack of sexual attraction or interest with others altogether. Just like bisexuality, this exists on a spectrum, and asexual people may experience no, little, or conditional sexual attraction altogether. So the plus, like I said, does a lot of heavy lifting because there's a lot more terms under the LGBTQ plus umbrella, like two-spirit, which many indigenous communities use as a way to describe different kinds of gender binaries. There's pansexual as well, folks that are attracted to many different genders or gender expressions or gender identities. There's homoflexible, which is just a fun word for people that are questioning. There's genderqueer. There are people who decide that a male or female binary is just not for them at all, and they want to experience genders that either are in between or do not exist at all on that binary, and they're making up their own. So what about ally, you might ask? Is ally in the LGBTQ plus acronym? And we generally say no, that allies are a very welcome part of our community, but they are not part of a protective umbrella under which we are fighting for certain rights and do not have certain protections. So what we love about allies is people who understand their space as allies and do not want to be part of the LGBTQ plus community, but want to be a supporter of them. Okay, so that was, again, a lot of information dumped on you. Does anybody have any questions about the LGBTQ plus umbrella and some of the terms we have underneath it? Okay, great. We're going to move on then. There are some slides with questions for the crowd, so you will be engaged, don't worry. So I promised we would get back to transgender issues. And
Hey, Zach.
yes.
I'm sorry. Can you mind going back?
Not at all.
I was trying to ask a question. I didn't realize I was on mute. What can you clarify pansexual for
Sure.
me? That group in general. The two-spirit, I think I get. Pansexual, homoflexible, I think I got. But if you could just revisit that, that would be helpful. I found that a little complex.
So I'll start with two-spirit. There's a lot of indigenous communities around the world and in America where there's a special sort of signifier for two-spirit people, which is a little bit like non-binary. They believe that there's a female spirit and a male spirit that exists inside of them, and that's how they express their gender. Pansexual is very similar to bisexual, where it's pretty much used interchangeably at this point. At one point, one of them was used just for sex and one was for gender, but now pansexual and bisexual are pretty much used interchangeably. Yep. And homoflexible is just like a fun term for people that are exploring what life might be like under this umbrella. And genderqueer are folks that don't subscribe to a gender binary at all. And they're interested in exploring what life is like in the middle of two genders, or maybe not identifying as a gender whatsoever.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so transgender issues. So transgender is also an umbrella term, just like LGBTQ plus IA, for people whose gender identity and or expression is different from the cultural expressions based on the sex they were assigned at birth. So these are all terms we learned before. Let's break them down. So let's start with the sex that they were assigned at birth. A person might have been assigned male or female at birth and is now exhibiting gender identity, which they have inside, which they feel in their mind, body, and soul is not the same as the gender that they were assigned at birth. Or their gender expression, the way that they're externalizing what their gender is based on cultural expectations, is different. So does that make sense to everybody? Now So non-binary is something that fits in here. And these are folks who do not identify exclusively as a man or woman. Now, Robert, I'm gonna put you on the spot because you know a non-binary person. That is the other person who works for the IBA, my colleague, Kai. They go by they, them pronouns, and they are a non-binary individual. We're gonna get into pronouns in just a little bit, but they do not identify as male or female exclusively. They believe that there is a spectrum in between, and they are on that spectrum, somewhere in between, that is not male or female, even though they were assigned as a woman at birth. So you might know people who are non-binary. So this is opposed to cisgender, which is something that I am. It's a term used to describe people whose gendered identity aligns with the sex assigned to them at birth. So I was assigned male at birth. I generally feel like a male inside in my mind, body, and soul. I, for the most part, act in accordance with cultural expectations on how males act in this region and in society. So I identify myself as cisgender, and I imagine that many of you on this call do as well today. Cisgender is basically the opposite of transgender. And I think a lot of people have trouble with cisgender because it's something that applies to them, but they probably didn't hear about it until much later on in their lives. But it's a word, and it just means that you are not transgender. It is a catch-all for anybody who relates to the sex that they were assigned as birth as their gender identity or expression. So some terms you might hear under the trans umbrella include gender nonconforming, gender queer, gender fluid, transgender, agender, non-binary, and many more. There's always new words that are sprouting up that are very specific to people's experiences. There's very little difference between many of these, but gender nonconforming are folks who might be doing things outside of the expectations that are placed on them for their gender. Gender queer, like I explained before, are folks who maybe don't subscribe to gender at all, but believe that there is that the binary does not exist and they're somewhere in the middle of it. Gender fluid are people who are discovering what their gender is and might feel one way one day and another way the next, and are trying to land on something that is good for them. There's no rule that says that anybody has to land on anything, and those are folks that are on a journey. Transgender, we just discussed. Agender are people that don't believe in gender altogether. They just think it's a social construct that's weighing others down. And we discussed non-binary as more. So I want to open this up for questions as well. I know that transgender questions are ones that people like to ask. I know that these are concepts that we had vague understandings of even 5 to 10 years ago, and we're starting to be able to attach more pertinent vocabulary to them now. So does anybody have any questions about the transgender umbrella? We're going to go to an umbrella graphic next. So if you have questions, maybe this will help answer them. So here's the transgender umbrella. You'll see that it's next to the cisgender umbrella. The person who did this graphic made the cis umbrella very boring and black and white, and the other ones are very colorful. That was not my choice, and it's not a judgment on any of our communities. But the transgender umbrella, you can see on one side of it, you have trans men and trans women. And then there's non-binary communities, which fall under the trans umbrella. And those are some of the things that we discussed before. And along the lines of the promise that I was learning at the same time that you were, I had never heard of demigirl, demiboy, or neutral, or probably many of the more things that are talked about on TikTok today, which is a program that I am too old to understand or engage with. So there's always going to be more and more terms that we are learning for folks about their identities as we are able to parse what our identities are in society. So I'm going to move on from here, unless there are any questions. Okay, great. So this is something that was introduced to me a couple of years ago, and I find it really helpful to sort of summarize what we were just talking about all together. There's the gender unicorn, and it promises that each of us is our own unicorn with our own sort of makeup of the different things that we just talked about. So there's gender identity, like we just talked about. Is your identity what you feel inside? Is it male, man, boy, female, woman, girl, or is it something else? You get to pick. Is your gender expression feminine or masculine or other? Again, something you get to pick. Sex assigned at birth is something that's given to you at birth. You'll notice that intersex is a category there, as a medical category. To whom are you physically attracted? Is it women, men, or maybe it's other genders or a combination of genders? Maybe it's everybody, maybe it's no one. And same for emotionally attracted to. So these are all different things about each and every one of us that could vary by degrees. They're all different spectrums, and they're all different concepts. So when we're talking about gender, we really mean a lot of different things in gender identity expression. And when we're talking about sexual orientation, we mean a lot of different things, like who we are physically attracted to or who we are emotionally attracted to. And when we're talking about sex, we're generally talking about what it is assigned at birth, and then there are all these layers on top of it that we can also talk about. So I found the gender unicorn really helpful to sort of map out everything that we just talked about. And it really sort of gives you the perspective that everybody does have a very different map like this of what we're feeling about who we are, what we're feeling about how other people are, and who we're attracted to. So I find this really interesting. I hope that you do too. And Robert, I'm happy to send you the picture of the gender unicorn, which I did not make up. The Trans Student Educational Resources did up in the top corner, but it's a very popular teaching tool that people use just to sort of get to get straight all of the different ways that we are expressing ourselves as people. Does anybody have any questions about this? All right.
I don't, Zach, I'll bring it up now. Man, it drives me crazy. I know a couple of people who are non-binary, and I struggle holding on to they and them, right? Like I'll use it some, and then, you know, these are people that either appear to me as more one sex than another, and like, I'm not trying to screw it up. And I wish there were like an easier terminology or something. There's something about that is a struggle. Like I'll get it right a couple of times, and then I end up slipping. And I don't know if there's any trick or good way to kind of hold on to using that or not.
Well, good news. We're going to get to that in just a couple of slides, and we are going to talk about what the big trick is.
Okay.
So this is me admitting, man, this can be confusing, right? Yes, it's very confusing sometimes. And all that we can ask of allies is that everybody tries their best and learns. No one knows everything when we have an evolving language. It's impossible to know everything. And you should be very comfortable as somebody who does not know everything about this. I am very comfortable knowing that there's not everything that I know about this. And if I don't talk to my family, I could go for weeks without talking to a straight person with my job. So just trust that you are all in a very good space, even just being here, being willing to learn about these terms and how we can use these terms to affirm and uplift other people. So here's what we would ask about great allies. And there's going to be lots of these throughout the evening. But these are some good ones that I want to tell you now if you're panicking about this being a confusing moment for you. So one, it's good not to make assumptions about people's sexual orientation or gender identity. Robert just mentioned right now that somebody appears to have a gender expression that's masculine, but might go by they, them because they're non-binary, and that can be very confusing. And it is. And we'll talk a little bit more about pronouns coming up. So the next thing is make an effort to use correct pronouns and names. It's an easy sentence to say, but it's also sometimes tough to do in practice, and that's okay. Allies speak out against homophobia, transphobia, and anti-LGBTQ+ harassment and discrimination. We are at most 10% of the population, although that is growing, but we need help from allies to get anything done. Speak out against the use of anti-gay slurs. You have the privilege and the leverage in those moments to be able to speak out against them. Be supportive of anyone who chooses to come out. That's a pretty easy one. You just have to listen to people and affirm what their choices are. Create affirming spaces. I wanted to really highlight the word affirming here as unequivocal respect and support for a person's identity. I think you'll hear a lot of folks talking about tolerance and acceptance of the LGBTQ+ community, but I don't think that those are enough. I think that those are a great maybe appetizer to what we want as the main course, and that is affirmation. Tolerance is really not great. I mean, it's pretty much the lowest standard possible, right? And acceptance really makes it sound like you have to do a lot of work to accept that something is happening. But affirmation is something that you can do affirmatively as allies instead of just accepting as a passive thing. And then attending LGBTQ+ educational events when appropriate, right? So this is an appropriate one. Any of the collaborations that we do are appropriate. Everybody with our chamber, we have lots of allies in our chamber, so everybody's invited to come. There's going to be some spaces that are exclusively for LGBTQ+ folks, and allies should respect those, but otherwise, come and make friends at LGBTQ+ events and learn something. I'm going to move on to the next slide unless people have other things that they think would make great allyship, or have any comments here, or want to just say out loud, yes, this is hard to learn. Okay, great.
I'm gonna say actually that this is hard to learn, and I understand. I had a brother who came out as gay back in the 70s, and I think it was maybe similar in that it wasn't very accepted. There was a lot of negativity there. Now being gay is okay, quote unquote, but transgender is going through that, I think, of challenging times. So I understand a little bit the situation. What I struggle with is if I get it wrong. Like, how do you, when you meet someone for the first time, how do you, being in this community, Zach, refer to people as this is his father or his brother, or do you say, like, I don't know what to say sometimes.
That's so, first of all, thank you for speaking up and admitting that this is hard. I think that that's great because it is really hard. And thank you for also relaying your experience about being a family member ally to part of our community. I think that that's great. We're going to get into what if I mess up coming up soon on a slide, and even how to engage in conversations about pronouns to get those started. So that is all, it's all coming up soon, but it's a really great question and something I hope that you'll be able to leave today with some action steps to take. So, and we're going to do that right after this, Cher, because we're talking about pronouns. What are gender pronouns? They're things you use all the time. You know what they are. They're he, him, his, she, her, hers, they, them, theirs. But the real question is, why are they important? They're important because words and language are fundamental to the ways that we understand and navigate the world. So the words we use to talk about people, specifically trans and non-binary people, can be very important. Pronouns are what an individual identifies with. So not only is it respectful and affirming to use the right pronouns, but it also helps the way that you think about that person. It helps shape the way that you think about that person. So if you're using he, him pronouns for somebody who wants you to use he, him pronouns, eventually it is going to connect with you that that person is identifying as he, him. So this is courtesy of our friends at the Transgender Training Institute. And if anybody wants to do any sort of transgender training for their workplace that is comprehensive and amazing, I'm happy to refer them to you. They're wonderful. I'm doing sort of like a cherry picking of a lot of different things, but they are just the top regional group when it comes to doing really intensive training for transgender affirmation in the workplace. So more pronouns. So many non-binary people use a singular they. Don't panic. Like I said before, I have educators as parents, and sometimes, you know, when this concept was first introduced to me, I was like, how can we be using a singular they? That makes no sense at all. But we're already using it all the time as part of the English language when referring to somebody whose gender is unknown. So can anybody think of like a way that they're already using the singular they? I'll give you an example then. So suppose we were at an event and somebody leaves their coat behind. I say to my colleague, someone left their coat here. I hope they come pick it up. Mm-hmm. There we are. We're using the singular they, and we're not even blinking, right? We're not stuttering over it. It makes complete sense because we don't know the gender of somebody that we're talking about, that we just use they and we moved on in our day. So it's easy to get confused with the singular they. Many people were raised thinking that it needs to be plural, but note that that language does shift and change over time, and that singular they has been in use since at least the 14th century. So we are not breaking new ground, but as Robert said in a space of vulnerability before, it is sometimes hard to do. So we're gonna move on to that in just a moment, but I also want to say that some people will say things like he, they, or she, they as their pronouns, and they use both, and that's perfectly fine, and they can do that. And that means that you can either pick one, you can use both, you can do whatever you'd like, as long as it is respectful to that individual. So, oh my goodness, what happens if I misgender someone? And this is something, so I want to point out something that Ken Cher said before, and that was that he was afraid to say something. Like that is something that I picked up from what you said, that you're afraid to say anything at all. So We never want to be in a point where we're afraid to communicate with anybody at all because we're afraid to say the wrong thing. So the new stop, drop, and roll is apologize, correct it, and move on. So start with apologize. If you accidentally misgender somebody, you say, I'm so sorry, you just told me that. And then you correct it and you say, Kai is great, they're my favorite worker. And then you move on and you avoid continually talking about how bad you feel for making the mistake, because it makes the other person feel like they need to make you feel better. So you're the one who messed up, and that is perfectly okay. Humans mess up, but don't turn it into a situation where somebody has to start apologizing to you or making you feel better because you're the one who messed up, right? So it happens all the time. All you have to do is just apologize, say, I'm sorry, correct it quickly, or just use it correctly next time, and then move on as if the mistake never happened, because mistakes happen all the time. If there's something that you feel like you embarrassed somebody and you feel really bad about it when you get home, write an email or something like that if you feel like you absolutely need to, and say, I'm sorry that this happened tonight, it won't happen again. There's no need for you to respond to this. I just wanted to let you know I was thinking about it and I'll do better next time. There you go, done. You're taking the burden off the other person and you're letting them know that you're aware of what your mistake was, but the most important part is that you know that you're going to be working on it yourself. So how do you correct others when you hear somebody say, when you're referring to somebody else and they're using the wrong pronouns? It's easy to just say something like, actually, I think Zach uses he, him pronouns, as a way to correct that, and then move on from there. If it turns out that somebody is doing this repeatedly, you might want to pull them aside later and ask them if there's some sort of nefarious purpose to it, or if it's something that they're just not getting. And it's a moment to teach them about the things that we're learning today, about apologizing, correcting, and moving on. And if it is some sort of nefarious purpose that you've weaseled out of this person, then that's something for your HR department to understand. Or if it's something that's happening within a networking group, it's important to, I think, go to the leaders of that group and say that there are people here that aren't respecting people's identities, and what can be done about that, whether it's a conversation or whether it is against a code of ethics or conduct that that particular organization has. But generally, I think you will see that they are mistakes. It is very rare that people who are in our circles who want to be learning about other folks and are genuinely interested in creating business opportunities with them, that they want to do things that are bad and harmful to other people. I could be wrong and naive, but I think that that's generally where we stand as groups. So Ken and Robert, how are you feeling about these particular slides after the things that you talked about?
I think it's helpful, and I think the way I expressed my question was indicative of the lack of understanding I have for it, because I think I missed something too. Because I do have, I believe she would go as a she, as a niece now. And I will say, just from personal experience, when she identified as a him, she was not a very nice person and is much nicer now. So I think there's definitely a cause and effect there of being able to be yourself, and could make you a different person in that way too. But is it proper to ask somebody? So how do I refer to you? Yeah,
perfect. I mean, Ken, I should be, not that I'm being paid for this, but if I were, I would be giving you some money, because you're setting me up perfectly for whatever the next questions are in our conversation. It's great. So let's ask somebody their pronouns. If you're not sure what to use for someone, it's okay to ask. You can either do that by introducing yourself first if you don't know the person. Hi, I'm Elaine. I go by she, her pronouns. This opens the invitation for another person to name their own pronouns. Or you can just ask somebody, which pronouns do you use? What pronouns do you want me to use for you? I do this for any time I'm interviewing somebody, no matter who the person is, no matter what they look like, no matter if I would have bet $1 million on their gender expression, what I think that their pronouns would be. It's just always good to ask somebody what their pronouns are. And if you're in a networking situation, it might not be proper to ask somebody in a group, what pronouns do you want me to use for you? I think that's when it's more proper to say something like, hi, I'm Zach, I go by he, him pronouns, because that really opens the door for everybody to be able to say what their pronouns are. And then at the same time, it's best to keep asking everyone their pronouns and not just the people you think might be trans or non-binary. So if you are in a networking group and there is one person who might have a gender expression that is unclear to you, and you're around 5 other people, it might be a little bit awkward just to ask the one person with whom you're unclear about their gender expression what their pronouns are. It might be better to say, this is a great opportunity for us all to say what our pronouns are, or just introduce what yours are and let people have the opportunity to say what they are or not. And I would say the last thing about this is if somebody's not sharing their pronouns and you don't know, it's not really an emergency situation for you. You can say you can use whatever you think the pronouns might be, and maybe they'll correct you. And again, you can apologize, correct yourself and move on. But it's rarely going to be a situation that ruins a person's life if they're not sharing their pronouns with you and you get it wrong after you have made overtures to try to discern what those pronouns are. It's all about, I think, taking whatever steps you feel like are necessary to be respectful. So does that make sense, Ken?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. And it's even the kind of thing where you can ask your niece, like, what pronouns do you use? How can I, what do you want me to use for you? How can I best be the most respectful individual to what your gender identity is? And I think you are correct that you'll find that if you have friends or family members that you knew pre and post transition, that I think everybody is a little bit more pleasant to be around when they're allowed to be ostensibly who they are.
Hey, Zach,
Yes.
I have to say, I love that, avoid continuing to talk about the fact that you messed up. I think that's really important. Even if you're feeling that way, it's really instructive to say, don't put the person in a position where you're expecting them, or it seems like you're expecting them to make you feel better. I just thought that was extremely helpful. Not something that I have ever thought of before. Very clear. Thanks.
Yeah, because I would be the kind of person, I think, to just do over the top apologies, right? And because I feel so bad, but what it's really doing is making the other person feel like they need to step in and be a caretaker for you. And, that's not always the best dynamic to have with somebody that you're trying to respect. So I'm glad that resonated with you, Robert. All right. I'm going to pick it up. So here's 6 action steps you can take right now. If you're cisgender, always introduce yourself with your pronouns. It's helpful. This was one, Robert, that I thought of for you. And, Z's, yourself, ears, fair, here. We're not even going to talk about these. These are like LGBTQ plus, like 203. We can do those later if we ever have another one of these. But practicing with they. So Robert, the example that I use for this is if somebody had a maiden name and they got married and they decided to change it, it just takes a little bit of practice for you to know that Mary Smith is now Mary Jones. And sometimes it takes you a little bit of practice at home to talk to Mary Jones and to think about Mary Jones. And I think that's how it is with they pronouns, that maybe envision them in your head and say you're talking about them and they are doing this. And if you just take a few minutes to yourself to practice every once in a while, I think that that's a really good way to sort of do that. I think that, it's okay to make mistakes, like I said, but practice always helps. Ken, like we were just talking about, what pronouns do you use? Don't assume just because a person looks a certain way, just ask. Accidentally misgender somebody, apologize, correct yourself, move on. Further education about pronouns or topics, there's lots of videos online, lots of articles about it, easy to do. And then look at the policies within any groups that you belong to and see if there's gender neutral language instead of he or she. If you really want to be inclusive, maybe you change those to they, or maybe you say he, she, or they, or there are ways that you can make things more gender inclusive for everybody if that's something that you really care about doing. So I wanted to take this opportunity to sort of pivot into how we make workplaces, since this is a networking group. How do we talk about making workplaces LGB and especially trans affirming? So these are just a few of the different ways and questions that I want you to think about tonight and think about them in the future. And what this looks like where you work or where you network. So staffing and leadership, who are you hiring and how? And are your application materials using gender neutral language? Are they being posted in places where LGBTQ plus people are seeing them? Are you posting people with some sort of homophobic history that you find online? Those are all things to think about. Policies and practices. How are you treating your employees? Are they protected? Do you have any guidelines that are protecting folks in the workplace if they are LGBTQ plus? There's lots of resources to look up about that, but this is just like a very general question to think about. Are your systems and spaces compatible with your values? Is there somewhere for a non-binary person to go to the bathroom? Is there anything that's hanging up that might be insensitive to any sort of communities? Are there systems where when somebody reports harassment, is the duty on the harassed to prove that something happened? There are all sorts of systems that you could really think about that make things affirming for other people. Workplace culture, ask yourself, would you want your LGBTQ plus friends or family working there? And are they able to bring their full selves to work if they are? That's just a very general question that has a lot of specifics to it. And not every workplace can be perfect, but it's a good starting place to really think about would you want to bring your LGBTQ plus friends or family into that space? And community and social responsibility. I'm going to get into this more on the next slide, but what do your public displays of support look like? And not just for LGBTQ plus communities, but for all communities. And does your business have a stated community or social responsibility, and are you fulfilling that? Just some things to think about when we're thinking about affirmations in the workplace. So this is how I tell people they can be the best boss ever. And there are 5 easy steps, I think, to make companies more inclusive and equitable for LGBTQ plus folks. So 1 is understanding that company policies are the absolute minimum expectation that any community should have. So if you have clear and robust policies, that's a great starting point. But as an attorney, I can tell you, you have to understand the formal mechanics of the law versus workplace practice. So, for example, last summer, was it last summer or the summer before, there was a landmark Supreme Court ruling about LGBTQ plus discrimination in the workplace that somebody would read and think that it is no longer allowed. But more than 50% of LGBTQ plus employees routinely every year continue to report discrimination in the workplace. So that it's very different. The way that the actual workplace practice works is much different than the actual formal mechanics of what the law looks like. It's up to you as leaders in workplaces to make sure that your policies are just the starting point, but they have to be put into practice in demonstrable ways. We love having people establish employee affinity groups for all sorts of different communities. I know that, let's use Comcast as an example. They have affinity groups for women, LGBTQ plus people, service disabled veterans, people of all different racial and ethnic backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. Those are great for a million different reasons, but one is to get people together to celebrate their identities. Another is to provide a way for them to have leverage and talk to higher ups about policies that they want changed and affected in the workplace. Promote the benefits of diversity. So inclusive company culture begins at the top with visible, loud, and confident support. If you are the leader of a group, even if it's not a group that you are a part of, you should be visible, loud, and confident with your support. That's what allies should be doing. And we can also go into this, but like diverse workplaces just operate better and more productively. So if you have to say what the bottom line and doing the right thing are meeting in the middle of this Venn diagram, then they absolutely are. Help allies be visible with symbols and pronouns. Have pronouns in your signature if that's something that you want to do on your email. Don't require it, but encourage it to people. And allies of verbs. That means you have to be doing stuff. It's a title given out to others by earning it. And finally, this is a big soapbox one for me. Engage with the community, but not just once a year. You have to engage with communities that you love and want to support beyond obvious events or crises. So for example, I am just as gay in November as I am during June, but my phone rings off the hook in June so that I can go and do events for people as a gay person during Pride Month. I'm probably even gayer in November and December, if we're being completely honest. And I know that my Black friends are just as Black in June as they are in February for African American History Month. My women friends are just as much women in October as they are in March. So you should be engaging with communities beyond just when their month of celebration is. Those celebration months are great. And you know what? Like, you should have as many margaritas as you want during Pride Month. I'm giving you permission to do so, but you have to talk to gay people outside of just the month of June. Any questions or things that I might be missing on this very incomplete list of how companies can be equitable and inclusive more? Okay, I'm gonna move on then. So a quick LGBTQ plus rights snapshot. Yes, this is wonderful that acceptance is at an all-time high, although we talked about the word acceptance. Visibility is greater than ever. You can't turn on Netflix without seeing some gay character. Great, gays are everywhere. We should be on every TV show, just like straight people. I also think that straight people should be on every TV show as well. More people want to be trained and learn more. This is great. You know, part of the reckoning over the past couple of years about people not knowing what they don't know is that they want to know more. And that's really fantastic. We should be encouraging that all the time. There is still a long way to go. We have anti-trans bills and new ones every day. Literally hundreds of them are being introduced. And they're being introduced in 34 states and they've been passed comprehensively in 3. There's the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida with more on the way. There's book bannings all over the place that are hyper-focused on LGBTQ plus and BIPOC communities. We still have no comprehensive equality act at the federal level or the state of Pennsylvania right now. That means that you can get married to your same-sex partner on a Saturday and be fired on Monday in many parts of the state of Pennsylvania to this day, if you have a picture of that wedding on your desk. Hate crimes are on the rise for all marginalized communities, but especially against trans people of color, where the murder rate is at epidemic rates. And workplace discrimination is at an all-time high. A lot of folks have been empowered to hate overtly over the past couple of years for a number of different reasons that go beyond just political administrations, although that is a driving factor of it. And I always say that the IBA is a nonpartisan group because we are a chamber of commerce and that's what we are, but we cannot be apolitical as long as our identities are made political. So these are things that are happening, and that's why it's important to have a workplace that is affirming for people, because not only are you attracting the talent that you need for your workplace, but private industry has often led the way in ways that the government is unwilling or unable to do when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights. So I want to pause there because now we're going to pivot into the chamber aspect of this, and that's maybe not as exciting as LGBTQ plus 101, although it's I think it's very interesting and it tells you a little bit about LGBTQ plus audiences that you might appreciate as business people. But I want to stop it for a moment to get any questions that you might have about LGBTQ plus 101 stuff. Like I said, it's very high level and not at all comprehensive, but it's a lot of information. Okay,
Zach,
great.
it is a lot of, I want to applaud you on a very robust program. And I know you're saying that this is only the start, and I get that, and really well done. I can't let that go unsaid.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And I have to agree with you, Robert. This is Lori. Can we have a copy of these slides? Because there is so much, and so much of this is, I think, to be sensitive, to learn how to do it correctly and compassionately and supportively.
Yes, let me make sure I send you the slides, and I have to make sure I put in there what was from the Transgender Training Institute, because I put on one slide, but it applies to 2 others. So as soon as I credit it properly, I will make sure that you guys have a copy of the slides.
Thank you.
Zach,
Sure.
also your approach is great because you make us feel, I think, make everybody feel comfortable.
I'm glad you feel that way. I hope you do feel comfortable. I want everybody to be able to ask silly questions here if you think that they're silly, and we can make sure that you leave a better ally today. And I think it's also important to say over and over again that this is not something that you absorb in just one session. It's something you absorb by practicing and by living life and by having LGBTQ plus people in your life and by working to make your workplaces better places. So this is, maybe it's the first step for some of you, and maybe it's the 15th step for some of you, but it's certainly not the last. So I'm glad that this group is so receptive to what we're talking about. I'll sort of speed through the next step because it really is about LGBTQ plus chambers and about commerce generally for LGBTQ plus communities. So we exist for the same reason why you think any chamber of commerce exists: to provide opportunities, education, and resources, to provide networking and support, create and strengthen business and management allies, supplier diversity opportunities, and the unique intersection of advocacy interests. One thing that is really cool about being an LGBTQ plus chamber is that we get to do a lot of advocacy work for the community as well. One not so cool part of it is that often LGBTQ plus advocacy interests and business interests are in tension with one another. So it provides a lot of interesting conversations that we have around the rights of workers against the rights of employers. And we are never bored when it comes to the policy interests that we are getting behind. And it's really just sort of a fascinating sort of world to live in. And I'll tell you more about that at a different time. And please corner me at the next Beacon IBA event that we have together, because I could talk your ear off about it, but I won't do that tonight. But more why LGBT chambers. I love statistics. So I would say the statistics are like Speedos in that they reveal a lot, but they often hide what is most important. So I want you to think about that when we are checking out what all of these next few slides of statistics look like. So this 4.1% of all Americans over the age of 18, roughly 10 million people, identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. This is going way up, and it's not because of anything that is happening that is turning people gay or more gay. I wish that there were a magic spell that we could use. Believe me, we have all tried. There is nothing of that sort. But as more conversations about LGBTQ plus individuals are occurring in places and homes, and more visibility is happening in public spaces or in entertainment media, more people are realizing that they are part of the community. So there's no sort of like large recruitment effort. I wish that there was, but instead people are just learning that they are part of this community. The buying power, yes.
Hey, Zach.
Yes, Robert. Yes.
Is the general consensus that is still undercounted because of people being uncomfortable admitting that for whatever they're?
Yeah, I think that like the general stats now are, and I didn't put this in here because I couldn't find anything to confirm it, but I think like conversationally, we're talking like between 6 and 10% of folks I think are identifying, and people are identifying younger and younger. And I think that people are identifying as more of the words that we talked about in the beginning that did not exist 5 to 10 years ago. So people are finding their ways into the community through different vocabulary and different experiences. And I think, like you said too, you hit the nail on the head that there are still people that are never going to feel comfortable identifying themselves as part of the community, often for very good reasons about that have to do with safety. So we're probably undercounting whenever we have numbers like this. The buying power, pretty big, 917 billion in 2015. I'm not sure what it is right now. Unfortunately, for those of you who have LGBTQ plus folks in your family or friends, you will know that the census eliminated questions around sexual orientation. So there's not going to be any real way for us to know in this black hole of data until potentially 2030, when another census takes place, to know how many LGBTQ plus folks are in the nation. The only way that you could identify as such on the census is if you lived with your same-sex partner. So that is massively undercounting the amount of folks that we are in the country. Gays and lesbians are twice as likely to own a small business or be self-employed. And that is great news, because part of it is that, yes, our community is renowned for being creative because we often have to tell stories to keep ourselves alive over the years. But also the bad news about this is that gays and lesbians are, and bisexual people and transgender people are often marginalized out of workplaces where they do not feel comfortable or are fired for a pretext or subtext around their sexual orientation. So they're often forced into being entrepreneurs. And that is one reason why our LGBTQ plus chamber exists. Here's some better news. The business owners that are part of our national chamber generate over $1.7 trillion in economic impact. That would make us as gay businesses the 9th biggest GDP in the world, bigger than Canada, Australia, and Russia. So our buying power is large, but there's also the myth of gay affluence. Not everybody in the LGBTQ community is affluent, and often we are at the lower ranks of many lists of impoverished communities for some of the reasons that I just mentioned. Here's some great news about the loyalty of LGBTQ plus customers. Once you become friends with us, we choose to do business with companies that we know have a commitment to diversity and equal treatment of employees versus non-LGBT plus consumers. We prefer at 46% products from companies that support nonprofits serving our community. 7 out of 10 LGBTQ plus adults say it is important for me to know that a financial institution does not discriminate. 3 out of 4 individuals have changed brands when it comes to a company that had exhibited LGBTQ plus support. And our consumers have a deeper trust for products and services that target and support our community. So there's a group called Get Fluid that I got these statistics from, and it's the business case for intentional inclusion. Right now, 46% of employees still remain in the closet at work. Unwelcoming workspaces can cause a reduction of 30% of employee engagement and productivity. So you are leaving 30% of engagement and productivity on the table if your workplace is not welcome, where people can be themselves. 73%, almost 3 in 4 employees who hide their identity at work will most likely leave within 3 years. Pronoun use and sharing have become common and expected. The inclusion policies increase LGBTQ plus employees' job satisfaction, commitment to employer, and even our health outcomes. You are actually making LGBTQ plus people healthier when you treat them well at work. Companies with LGBTQ plus inclusivity massively outperform others in their sector. And here's a scary one for anybody who is in charge of hiring. 77% of Gen Z claim that a company's DEI policies are a determining factor of their choice of employer. So the kids are all right, and they are extremely picky. Here's a quick snapshot of what the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce sort of looks like. We are one affiliate of around 62 that are in the country right now. You can see where they are all over the country. Anywhere that you would expect there to be one, there most likely is one. We have certified businesses that are somewhere around, it's upwards of 1,800 now, not 1,645. So many people certified during the pandemic. Yeah, it's a pretty great organization. We don't get any money from them. We are an affiliate on our own. We have to do our own fundraising and sourcing of members and making sure that we are sustainable, but they're a great organization whose mission we definitely are excited to advance. Here's some exciting statistics about the LGBT economy at work, and this is 2016, so things have grown since then. But we've created 33,000 jobs. We've added 1.7 to the economy. Most LGBTQ plus businesses are in business for about 12 years right now, which is very high over the national average, with an average revenue of $2.4 million. And it is more likely to find diversity, equity, inclusion in LGBTQ plus businesses. You're 17% more likely to find that in businesses owned by LGBTQ plus individuals. Supplier diversity. If you're not into supplier diversity, get into it. It's a program where it encourages the use of minority-owned, such as women-owned, veteran-owned, LGBT-owned, service-disabled, veteran-owned, historically underutilized businesses as part of people's commerce streams. More than a third of the Fortune 500 use this right now, and many cities and states include LGBT certified businesses in their procurement processes as a qualified class. So you have a lot of folks who are wondering in large companies how best to support LGBTQ plus communities. And one way is bringing LGBT small businesses into your commerce streams. It could be literally life-changing for LGBT businesses. Even one catering contract, one promotions contract, that could really change the way that businesses are existing for the rest of their lives. Here's what we do as the Independence Business Alliance. So I told you about this already. We serve 11 counties. We have supplier diversity programs, networking events, around 350 members, everyone from corporate to solo owned. We have a coalition of ERGs, or employee resource groups. We say that we are not your average chamber because we do a lot of advocacy work as well. And I think we throw one hell of a party, just personally. We do a really good job. I mean, not to stereotype, but the gays can throw a party. We really can. So I hope that you'll be at some of our events that we have throughout the year. Now that I'm being forced out of my hermitage at home and back into the world where we have to throw great parties for folks again, I really hope, in all seriousness, I'm not just joking, I do hope to see some of your faces at some of our events. It would be really great to meet you in person. One of the things that we do is, I don't have it on here, but we just formed a formal coalition with the African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American chambers to be a diverse chamber coalition in the city of Philadelphia, partially because a lot of our interests are the same, and partially because when we wrote letters individually, it would be like shouting into the void. But when we all came together during the pandemic and started to speak with a unified voice, people got afraid, and we started to be able to bully larger entities into doing the right thing. That is great. We should get more minority communities together to be bullies and to get people to do the right thing, because doing the right thing is awesome, always good for the bottom line, and it's usually the right thing to do as a moral imperative. That started with our IBA Intersections program, where we had when I started with the IBA in 2015 as the first executive director, I inherited a extremely homogeneous white male group. White males are great, I'm one of them, but it cannot be the only representation of a community when we want to be diverse and inclusive and really look and feel like Philadelphia's LGBTQ plus community being so vibrant and diverse. So we've really changed the way that we do things with our board and with our membership, and it looks and feels completely different now. I think that Rashonda is on the line here, and she can probably attest to the fact that we've grown in leaps and bounds when it comes to the early days of IBA diversity, equity, and inclusion. And our trans work program is something that we do. It's economic opportunity for the trans community. We hold special programs and job fairs specifically for the TGNC community, that's transgender and non-conforming communities, gender non-conforming communities. And it's been wildly successful. We've been able to place a lot of trans folks into businesses where they are met with affirming workplaces. And it's the first ever program of its kind run out of a Chamber of Commerce in the United States. So that's been a lot of work to get it up and running. We've put the blueprint and the map of it together, and we're giving it to other LGBT chambers so it could become a nationwide movement to get more people in the trans community employed, because it truly is a epidemic of under and unemployment for a community, and people are being marginalized out of their workspaces as we speak this moment. So if you are interested in hiring trans people where you work, or learning what you can do to become a trans affirming workplace, definitely get at me after this so we can talk in more specifics about how that works. I'm making sure that I have no questions here. Oh, Paul has to drop off. Okay. People are dropping off, I think, because it's 6:30ish or after 6. Anyway, good timing for the drop-offs, because thank you. Please keep in touch with me. I hope that we see you on May 24th. Robert, we're going to start to put those materials together, or I'd have a slide here today, but follow us on any of these different channels, and please be in touch with me. I'd love to talk to anybody individually. And does anybody have any more questions for the evening?
I do have a request, if you're okay with it. I love your analogy, your party analogy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it might be a good, maybe a good way to, good thing to leave people with.
That's great. So, you know, this analogy comes from a woman named Vernee Davis, and She actually has a great book, which is What If I Say the Wrong Thing? It's called. This is not from this book, but there's a book called What If I Say the Wrong Thing? And it's 25 situations where you can practice your cultural competence. And I found that really helpful when I first got this job because, like Ken mentioned before, it can be really stifling if you're afraid to say the wrong thing altogether. And knowing how you can get yourself out of those situations gracefully and as a person who is respectful of identities of all kinds, I think is very helpful. But Vernee Davis's original analogy about diversity, equity, and inclusion was diversity is who you invite to the party. Inclusion is asking people to dance. And something that we've sort of tacked onto that is equity is having everybody help pick out the playlist and the menu, right? Letting everybody be a stakeholder. So when you're thinking about it in a party analogy, diversity is not enough and inclusion is not enough, but ways that we think about giving people an equitable stake in what we're doing. And that's all for me. I'm going to stop sharing and get back to this normal mode here. And yeah, does anybody have any questions, comments, grunts, scruples? Yes, I see that Erin has a question. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Zach. Thank you. That was awesome. I had a question about supplier diversity, which maybe it's just a term I don't know, but I was, around Black History Month looking for all sorts of resources for Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, et cetera, for different products that we purchase at our company. So you mentioned that. Can you tell me more about that resource that you have?
Sure. So one resource that I would say is absolutely when you are specifically looking for businesses that might be part of a chamber. So for example, the African American Chamber of Commerce, happy to make connections with you there. They have entire databases of Black-owned businesses that you'd be able to use for your supplier diversity efforts. Same with the Asian American, Hispanic American chambers. There's the Women's Business Economic Council in Philadelphia as well that has women-owned businesses. And there's a brand new Veterans Chamber of Commerce as well. And we exist for many reasons, but one of them is to make sure that you are connected to businesses that might be able to help you meet your supplier diversity goals.
Got it. So it's like a database that you have that you're willing to share.
I don't have it with the African American Chambers database.
No, the IBA, you have it.
Yes, we do. And I mean, that's part of being a member of the organization. It's how we stay sustainable, but we can definitely have a conversation about how we can engage with you about supplier diversity.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure. Please be in touch. And Morris wants the name of the book again. So I'm going to put it in the comment section. It's What If I Say the Wrong Thing by Vernee Davis. Any other questions that folks have?
Just appreciation for the great job you did today.
Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was, I'm glad you got me on a Monday. Would not have had the stamina on a Thursday night.
No, it's a very good presentation. You mixed humor in and really educated us a lot. Thank you.
I so appreciate the effort that went into this, Zach. It's a lot. And,
I appreciate you asking. Oh, it's Myers. Oh my God. So I'm already like giving you like misinformation. It's Vernee Myers. Thank you, Morris. You are right.
No problem, Zach. Good job tonight. Appreciate it.
If I could offer a potential suggestion, Zach, you did it in our first get together, I think, with the IBA, is to include a slide about how to change your pronouns. I think there are a lot of people on Zoom who are clueless in terms of how to deal with that. And if, again, to keep people from saying, oh, I don't know what to do, they're embarrassed. But if you just make it a part of the presentation, I think you can drive some change behaviors there.
That's a really good idea. Yeah. Changing pronouns on Zoom, I think, is really helpful. And so here's an example of something that I just learned myself from the Transgender Training Institute, is that I thought it was great to make it mandatory, right, for some of our meetings to make people put their pronouns in. But what I was not thinking of, which the Transgender Training Institute trained me on, is that not everybody has landed on pronouns yet, or maybe somebody does not want to be outed as trans, right? And they don't want to do that. So that was a personal learning that I have. So from now on, I encourage people to use pronouns, and it would be great to encourage them armed with the technological know-how of how to do that.
Position it as if you'd like to change, or if you'd like to add that to your name, here's a way to do it.
Exactly. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. And that's all I got for you tonight. I hope that I hope that people will come to visit us on May 24th at the William Way Center. We got a sponsor who's gonna get the drinks and the food for us, and I think it's gonna be a fun evening. The William Way Center themselves are gonna do a quick little presentation about how they're building a new building and what that might look like in terms of economic opportunity for other businesses. And we haven't been able to meet in person, but we love networking with folks, and we love collaborative events. So if it's as successful as our online endeavors have been, I think it's going to be a great night.
Yeah, we'll need to get some succinct information to put in our announcement about the William Way and the work that they're doing to support the community and things like that.
I'll try. I'll get it from other people. Succinct is not my strong suit, so I'll have other people give us something pretty bite-sized for you.
So
yeah,
so much, Zach. This is great.
Yeah, really difficult to express my level of appreciation, Zach. Really fabulous.
Yeah, this is
I definitely agree with that. I definitely agree with that, Zach. That was phenomenal. And the other thing too is that I want to thank each one of you guys who are on the call, who do want to learn more. And to what Zach was saying earlier, it's not even the point of just constantly apologizing. It really is about what can you do to become a better ally. And this is the first step. So I want to thank each one of you guys as well.
And Zach, if you have ideas of how Beacon can help you, there's a lot of us that are really focused on how we can do it. And sometimes it may be very obvious to you, but not obvious to us.
Yeah, right.
And I've learned that the hard way from my son. Things that sound
yeah, often we don't know what to ask, right? And although Robert knows I'm an asker, and I'm asking people for favors all over town because that's what you do as a leader of an organization. So I'm not afraid to ask for sure, but if I can think of ways that I think y'all can be great allies to us. I mean, one is definitely like just continuing to network with us. Like I said, it's been a real silver lining of this miserable historical era that we've been able to make connections with another group like yours. And we have Robert and Rashonda to really thank for leading those efforts. And yeah, once we get to see you in person, I mean, it was great, Georgine, that you joined the IBA, right? Like that's very helpful to us as a organization that is trying to be sustainable. Not everybody has to do that, but that's one way you supported us, and we really do appreciate that. And I agree with Rashonda, like even showing up to things like this is very powerful and important. It would just be me and Robert and Rashonda here, like talking LGBT terms, if we didn't have folks who were willing to show up and learn and be vulnerable and really want to absorb what we're putting out there. And if you took away even one or two of the action steps tonight, I think that's a really great first step in what we're doing.
I think, again, as a former procurement professional, going out of your way to talk about DEI, DEI procurement is a hot button right now. So I think that's a good thing to do.
It is, and we need to keep it a hot button indefinitely. It cannot be a trend that is just, trying to make up for years and years of institutional racism and homophobia and other things as a very quick fix that we think is going to be solved in 5 years or so. It has to be something that is absolutely part of any company's mission to really get in the weeds on diversity, equity, inclusion. You need to really be extending economic uplift to the communities that you're talking about. And if you have ways that you can do that and using them as businesses, it's what you got to do.
I think one other thing that might help is if you had some people sharing actual stories and accomplishments and shooting down the stereotypes that people have. And
Lori, I'm glad you said that. I got loads of stories.
Teaches me how to be sensitive, and it doesn't teach people who have these stereotypes of, oh, if you are whatever group you belong to, we have long histories. Oh, I know everybody in that group is exactly the same, right? And so I think if we could demonstrate how wrong these stereotypes are, that, you know, people need to look deeper than that. I think it would go such a long way in helping people understand, oh, just because you're whatever, gay, straight, white, black, male, female, tall, short, succinct, or wordy, you know, which one I fall on there. So I'm with you.
I think Zach hit the nail on the head in terms of the kids being all right, because I'm buoyed and positive about younger people because they seem to get it regardless of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the monolithic thinking is going out the window. So I have great faith in our young people and their ability to fundamentally change things.
I agree.
You know,
with
we
you.
made it part of our programming.
Yeah.
We really made it part of our programming a couple years ago, where the intersections program that I had a slide on, one of the things that we did was the first year we had like mixers with all sorts of groups, but the second year we had three different programs, where one was with African American, LGBTQ plus communities, then Asian American, Hispanic American, where it was just a panel about very difficult discussions about prejudice and privilege and how that works in intersectional ways. And they were really well received. And you're right that it was like really important to have people's lived experience up on stage about that. And yeah, it was really powerful. And maybe that's something that Beacon wants to explore. Maybe there's a moment where you can have a time to talk about microaggressions and preconceived notions and how they're bad for businesses. Or Rashonda and I could just do like a microaggression happy hour where we just tell you stories about what we've experienced, because get a couple of drinks with us and we'll let you know.
I don't necessarily, I'll take the drinks, but I don't need the drinks to share those stories. Especially when you're talking about, and I know that we're great at time when we're talking about the intersectionality of things. As you guys know that I am a lesbian, you know, I'm Black and I'm a woman. So how does that impact me? You know, it is a little bit different because of the intersectionality, and that does have an impact as far as legality. It isn't just about who I am. So, you know, that as far as intersectionality can be, what did you say, Zach? Class 203? I think that'll probably be maybe, you know, it's like the AP class, right?
Have you ever thought about being Jewish? With one parent who's Asian and one who's indigenous, and you know, you're missing something.
I'm missing. Oh, actually, I have epilepsy, so I do have a disability as well.
And you wear glasses.
Pentecostal, yes.
You wear glasses. You don't have good eyesight.
Don't have good eyesight, and you know, the one thing that I am thankful and blessed to have is that I do have a positive attitude. And as long as we stay positive about the folks that we have around us, about our future generation, it doesn't matter what obstacles come towards us. We together in a collaborative manner will be able to really, you know, do miraculous things. So Zach, again, I applaud you for reaching out to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, you know, the African American Chamber of Commerce. The more voices that we have, the more influence that ends up leading.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.